All right, Sage Kosiorek, welcome to the Tim Burks podcast, episode 5. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah. So you've been on before, but just for the listener who hasn't listened to the previous one, and just to give some background, can you talk a little bit about your background and like some of the things that you've done, like your running career and film and coding and all the stuff that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a high school runner, distance runner, and cross country track. And that kind of brought me into, I continued running in college, my freshman year, and that's what brought me up to Butler University, where we met, of course. And I was, as a high school runner, I was incredibly motivated to, it was just something I really loved. I started in like 7th grade, and, there was just something about it. Like, my dad had run, marathons growing up, and it was just basically like, hey, like, my dad was like, you should try this. You might be good at it. And so I did in 7th grade, and there was an excellent coach at the time. Her name was Chris. We just called her Chris. It was just a great like vibe, great team camaraderie, and it was just like running is like it's a very difficult sport because it's a sport that requires sort of intense discipline, and it's very much an individual sport, even though in cross country there's some team aspect. You're not really considering that, right? It's just you and yourself, you and basically the clock, and you're basically just pushing yourself as far as you can go. And so there's something about that just sort of on a physical level, and like just like a mental level that is really nice. And you also ran, and I think it's also funny, like, looking back on it, because I'm doing a little running now, like just kind of by no means competitively anymore, but just like a few miles here and there just to stay fit. And what I've realized is, like, like, we can talk about all the external aspects of it, yada yada, but looking back on it, like, basically I think we were just like the runner's high. Like, we were just high the whole time. I mean, like, it's just it's like like if you go, like, now that when I go on a run, the reason why I do it is because of the just pure ecstasy feeling that you get afterwards. I mean, like, it's insane how good you feel after going on like a 2 or 3 mile run. And it sounds kind of granola, but like it's just like, looking back, and I think that was probably sort of the lower level mechanisms that were like keeping us sort of doing what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so like it just, I don't know. So yeah, that brought me to Butler, and I ran there for just a year. I was kind of like burnt out by the time I even got there. And it was great because it got me there, and there was, and then I met you, and I met, a bunch of our other friends, and, that was an excellent experience. And, it just, at this point, competitive running is sort of, it's definitely in the past, but, I think it grounded me in a way that, it definitely set sort of the internal, mental processes that I sort of go through that can, then be sort of extrapolated and applied to other domains, in ways that I think, I wouldn't have gotten to if I had done some other sport, right? It requires, again, like a intense internal discipline. You're basically relying on yourself. There are ways that I'm realizing that, it didn't really, it sort of projects you into this one direction, and it sort of underlines certain, strengths and aspects such as like internal discipline, being able to rely on yourself, etc. But one of the things that the real world requires, of course, is like, actually working on a team, actually working with others. And so that was actually pretty jarring, once I had kind of gotten out of college, because you don't really get that experience in college anyway, unless you're doing, I guess, particular majors. And so, once I entered the world of work, of course, that's sort of when, it's like, okay, there's all kinds of other, aspects that were just sort of weak and needed to be developed, that running didn't really, sort of strengthen or sort of address in any way. And teamwork is definitely one of those things, which I sort of developed later on. But, yeah, sorry, there was another part of your question, or?
No, that was good. I think that was a nice summary, start to summarize your background. And I definitely agree with you about running. Like, it gives you kind of a mental tool set that, I don't know, I think other sports you do learn mental discipline and toughness, and you get some of those benefits, but I think running is unique in the ability to like push through things, and that physical endurance really breeds mental endurance, I think, too. And with what you're saying about running now too, I have started doing the whole hybrid workout thing. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's like combination of running and lifting. So I'll do like 5 lifts, hop on the treadmill, run an 800, and then go back and forth for a few sets. And it's so funny because I remember being in high school and running never a great 800, but like 215 or something like that. Maybe 210. And now I'm like dying trying to get sub 4. But I feel so good after I do those workouts, and obviously I want to be in shape and get the physical benefits of like longevity and like having a body that works well and stuff like that. But the mental benefit, I completely agree, is the best part. Like, I just go through the rest of the day awake, like not feeling tired, feeling focused and alert and like well regulated emotionally. So I like that you said that. I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like it's like it's just like the foundation of the sort of mental processes that you're sort of having to deal with throughout the day. Health, of course, number one. But in order to get that, like the physical exercise that you do, and then also the nutrition. Like, I've realized nutrition is huge. And one of the things that, looking back on, was like, looking back, like, runners are like tiny, like super thin. I saw a photo of myself not too long ago when I was like 17, and I looked like a Holocaust victim. I mean, it was like, it's ridiculous. It's the fact that I was able to like, compete at all or even stand up is amazing. And, thinking back, like, we should have done workouts like what you just described, where you're like also building muscle. The other thing was like my diet was terrible. Even though at the time it was like, this is all, this is what runners eat, which is like pasta, carbs, carbo load, all this. It's like, no, that energy, that is quick burn energy. Like that's going to go out of you very quickly. What I should have been eating is fucking raw, like basically like raw meat, like, or not raw meat, but like, like eating
a little
actually
bit more
red
protein.
meat.
Yeah.
more protein, etc. And, maybe I definitely would have looked a lot better, that's for sure. And I'm sure I would have felt better.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I had Stan on, Ryan Seifert, for the last episode, and he's in great shape now, and he always was. But he said the same thing, like when we were running in high school, he would have a bagel and a Gatorade every day for lunch, and he thought he was being healthy. But looking back on it now, it's like, yeah, that was probably not the best nutrition.
Yeah, sugar and more sugar.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said too.
It's wild.
It's hard to eat healthy though. It's like, I feel like nutrition is one of those spaces where you can go so deep and there's so much information and so much conflicting information, and it's like, it's hard to know what to believe and what to eat and what not to eat and how to balance your diet. Like, you can only absorb so much information, and a lot of it, I think, is just trial and error.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think the other thing about, I think that's absolutely a good point. I think the other thing is like, it's like there's just like so many, like one size fits all methods that are out there. And it's like, like at some extent, all humans are the same biologically, but there's like subtle variations for everyone. And it's like that, the only way you can find that is through, like you said, trial and error, anecdotal evidence, and just, actually taking the time to experiment yourself. I think of course it takes a while, and you have to kind of, you have to be motivated to actually do it. But, that is, I think, ultimately the best way to, way forward. Cause like you said, there's just so much information out there, and you don't know what's right. And even now, like, there's just new information coming along all the time, and it's somewhat difficult. But I actually, like, lately I've been like, I don't know. I've been kind of like, looking at like, okay, what did people eat like before the 1900s? And kind of taking that as like a good guide, because I think the other problem is like there's just so much like synthetic, food out there, and it's like,
processed,
is it
ultra
really
processed,
ultra, full of, GMOs, etc. And it's like, people were fine and healthy like before, the 1900s as far as diet goes. And so, if you can get, you don't need much, like, meat, it's just like meat, bread has been sort of, demonized lately, but I mean, honestly, I eat bread and butter all the time, and it's fucking awesome. Like,
yeah,
I
recently, difference between like homemade, or like artisanal bread and Wonder Bread. There's highly processed bread that has a lot of added sugar, and then there's like homemade sourdough, and they're both bread, but they're not the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the other thing is like, what it's not that like, okay, yeah, I'm eating bread or I'm eating meat and that's good. It's like, no, what is the ingredients in that? What is actually behind it? What was, what was that cow eating? It's like, there's been like kind of a deeper like analysis of, what is actually in the food. It's not just like blanket, sort of categories, which I think it was sort of the prevalent sort of mindset for, at least like the, middle 1900s and up until maybe it seems like just recently. And only now it's like, there's so many like nutrition bloggers out there that are, talking about how, you're, really you should be, I read this excellent book, not too long ago called The Healthy Brain Book, and I think we've talked about it a little bit before, but it's kind of a hokey, like cheesy book, but the science behind it is actually legit. It's two doctors who wrote it, nutrition doctors, and they talk about fats. Like most of it is about fats because the brain, sort of is made of fats, and essentially just is a deep dive into like, what types of food, how do you make your brain healthy? Like that's essentially the premise. And it goes into, fish oils and how like salmon has this, like chemical in it that, this compound called, I think it's called astaxanthin. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's essentially the chemical that makes salmon pink. And the reason why this compound is so great for your brain is because that astaxanthin is what prevents oxidation in fish. And it's actually produced. The reason why wild salmon is better than farm salmon is because it's only produced when the fish has to basically swim upstream, right? Like salmon are known for swimming upstream, and that's what sort of generates this compound. And so, basically, if you're able to since the brain is made of fats, essentially what you want to do to keep your brain healthy is or one of the things is to prevent oxidation, right? Prevent breakdown of those fats. And so eating astaxanthin, eating wild salmon it's excellent for that. It's a way to prevent that from happening.
That's really interesting. I actually I'm working through a similar book right now. It's called Brain Energy. It's by this psychiatrist from Harvard, Christopher Palmer. And he's talking about nutrition and how what you eat affects your brain. And I'm only about halfway done with the book, but his basic premise is that basically all mental health issues, whether it's depression or anxiety or even like more significant levels of diagnosis like an OCD or stuff like that, it's all a problem with metabolism in the brain. That's his hypothesis anyway. And he talks about individual patients that he worked with and then also the science that supports that claim. And once I finish it, I can talk about that probably more in depth. But it's really interesting because I've definitely seen in my work as a psychologist, like there are some kids I've worked with where the families will either change their diet or introduce supplements, and where it has actually made a pretty significant difference for the kid. So yeah, it's crazy to think about. We think of the brain as kind of separate, the mind and the brain as separate from the body, or at least a lot of people do, and it used to be a very prevailing way to think. And I think now there's a lot, both in the science and kind of in the culture, where we're realizing that there's not necessarily the separation that we thought there was, and that your brain isn't like this set, static thing, but it is actually pretty dynamic, and there's a lot of stuff that crosses the blood-brain barrier, including the food that you eat and nutrients. And yeah, it's pretty wild. It kind of fits in with the theme we've been talking about, things that we used to think that are not kind of turning out to be exactly right. But that book that you mentioned sounds really interesting. What was it called again?
It's called The Healthy Brain Book.
The Healthy Brain Book.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's exactly right. And like the other thing is like the brain is tightly connected to the gut. Like I remember when we were in college and our good friend Luke and his wife was talking about how I remember them getting into like gut health, and I was like, what are you guys talking about? Like I do, like this doesn't make any sense. And they were just going on and on about gut health and like how they changed their diet and like how excellent they feel and all this. And it only took me like 6 years after that to realize like they were completely right.
Yeah.
And
they were ahead of the curve on that one.
Oh, major. I mean, like that, yeah, they were like right at cutting edge. But yeah, I mean, the gut is tightly connected, to the brain, and like, of course the gut is where all your food goes. And so, if you're putting poison there, like you're gonna feel bad, like mentally, brain fog can be contributed to that. Like there's all kinds of, just reasons to improve your diet. Like that, again, harkening back to sort of like the foundations of like functioning well, mentally, and just, related to like more, like abstract things like happiness and, spiritual connection, etc. Like if your health is in disarray, like you're not gonna feel great, and so your thoughts are gonna be bad, and it just sort of is a domino effect.
Mhm. Yeah, and what's really interesting too is like, I think a lot of people have an understanding that exactly what you just said. Like if you put poison in or you put bad stuff in, that's going to cause problems. It's going to be unhealthy. But I think what's also crazy is that our gut has way more cells in it than there are cells in our body. There's way more bacteria just by number of cells living inside of one human's body than there are human cells. And a lot of those are essential. Like we cannot live without them. For example, 90% of the serotonin that our brain uses is produced by bacteria in the gut. And our body cannot produce a sufficient amount of serotonin without those bacteria, which is like wild. And you have to make sure that you not only have that bacteria in your system, but also that you're feeding it through feeding yourself the stuff that it needs in order to make that serotonin that you need to function, which is wild. And serotonin is not just used in the brain either. I mean, it's used to like regulate temperature. It has a range of different functions in different cells in different parts of the body. But
wow, that's amazing. I had no idea. That's incredible. So isn't like serotonin serotonin compared to dopamine? What are I know they're both like related to like, basically feeling good, but like what's sort of the difference?
So I have an idea, but the caveat is this is outside my like a professional area of expertise. So I'm not 100% sure that what I'm about to say is right. That said, I think what serotonin, again, so in the body, it does different things. Like it helps to regulate temperature. I know that's one function it has. And then it has a bunch of other functions in like somatic cells in the body. But I think in terms of like psychologically, what I understand is I think it is a modulator of, I want to say it's like a modulator of neuron action and excitation. So the theory used to be that low serotonin contributed to depression or caused depression. That hypothesis is kind of proved false. But one thing that's interesting is if you look at people who have people with autism, they have extremely high levels of serotonin in their blood. And they also tend to be really sensitive to sensory experiences like loud noises or certain textures and stuff like that. And then if you look at people with lower levels of serotonin, they tend to be like understimulated. Like they tend to have less reactivity. So I think a big part of what it does is kind of regulate that your mental response to sensory input I think is a big role it plays. But again, that's like neuroscience. That's way out of my area of expertise, but that's basically what I understand.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that like there were, basically that serotonin was produced from the gut, and the gut was like the basically fertile ground for, its production. That's insane. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I don't have the information at the top of my head, and I could look it up, but I don't want to waste the time, like, making everyone listening to me look things up. But the 10 people who are going to listen to this,
I trust you. I trust you, Tim. I believe what you're saying.
Yeah, but I know the bacteria in our gut are responsible for making a lot of compounds that we need, not just serotonin, like certain vitamins as well. I think amino acids. I'm not sure about that one, but I think maybe long chain fatty acids and butyric acid. I know there's a lot of things that the microbiome that the bacteria in our gut produce that our body uses and needs to function well. Go ahead.
That's interesting. I know there was some connection with the long chain fatty acids and the brain. I remember just sort of reading from that book again that there was discussion. I vaguely remember there was discussion of like the difference between the long chain fatty acids, how they play a role in like basically strengthening. I think it was like the mycella or something in the brain, which is like the pathways that neurons use.
The myelin?
Connect to myelin, yes, that's it. Yeah, that's the word. The strengthening the myelin so that, which is basically like the way that, neurons sort of travel in the brain. And so if you can so the problem even like with like brain fog and like, not being able to like come up with something to say or, basically like any sort of difficulty in brain function can sort of relates to the myelin and how strong they are. The stronger the myelin you have, like the basically like the stronger infrastructure you have for your neurons to pass through and make connections. Essentially, if you have weak myelin, it's like your neurons can basically like fire, but they might go in a different pathway or a pathway it's not intended to go, because it like breaks through, right? At least that's sort of the vague understanding that I have. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and so I think the long chain fatty, I know there's some discussion of like the long chain fatty acids versus the short chain fatty acids and how like the long chain, I think they both have functions. But I think there was an emphasis on like trying to get more long chain fatty acids, into your body, which was sort of links back to the discussion of like, okay, what kinds of fats do you need? There are some fats that are better than others. Of course, like, again, like fish fat versus fat from like red meat. The fish fat is much better because I think it was there were probably a lot of different qualities, but one of the qualities I think was that they tend to have more long chain fatty acids or long chain fats than red meat does.
That makes sense. That's interesting. Yeah, the fat thing is a very interesting topic because I think that's another area where there used to be this thinking that like fat is bad. Like people thought about dietary fat in the same way as they thought about like visceral fat on their body. And they thought if you eat a low fat diet, that's how you'll lose weight and be healthy. And they basically just replaced fats with carbs. And well, we've seen how that's turned out. We have 60% of Americans are obese or overweight, and heart disease is the number one killer.
Yeah.
So it clearly didn't work out too well. But
yeah.
Yeah,
flip the pyramid upside down. That's how it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and just eat my friend Will, who's been on the podcast a couple of times, his line that I really like is, if Abraham Lincoln doesn't know what it is, wouldn't know what it is, don't eat it.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
That's a great measurement. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there is one thing I want to circle back to, just because I'm curious, because I forgot. Can you talk about, if you remember, what your PRs were from your running days?
Yeah. Let me see if I can. I don't even know if I remember. So I think all of my PRs were in high school. Because again, I kind of got burnt out in college. And of course the races kind of change once you get there. But my mile was, I think, 4:26. 2 mile was 9:20 something. 5K was 15:20. I know they all were in the X and then 20.
Okay.
And then 8, 10K. I honestly don't remember those. And those three were my main events: the mile, 2 mile, and then 5K. I think the 800 I did it was just somewhere just under 2. It wasn't like 150 something or whatever, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just like to have people say those, or at least the runners. Well, I guess mostly I've had runners on, because I think it's cool to know. Your PRs are a lot faster than mine. My mile was 4:52. So you're
That's
quite
still
a bit
solid.
faster.
I mean, anything under 5, though, is it's you're a legit runner.
Yeah. Well, I had the benefit of being on a really good team in high school. You know our friend Luke, and then my buddy Will as well. I mean, I would say in my class 2012, I'm not sure that there was anyone on the team who didn't break 5.
Wow. That's crazy.
Because we had Luke and Will who were running, gosh, I want to say they both ran their fastest at Acadia. I don't remember if the Acadia or the state meet they ran fastest at, but low 4s, sub 4:20. I want to say 4:11, 4:12.
Wow.
Was probably Luke's PR in high school. And then Will was right behind him. Will had a faster 2 mile. Luke was more of an 8 mile guy. But yeah, when you've got two guys who are running sub 4:20, it's a pretty good motivator to try to break 5.
Yeah. Yeah, if you were in South Carolina, you'd probably place in state, honestly. South Carolina is not when it comes to state level, it was basically when I was in high school, 95% of the races I ran, I was just it was basically racing against myself. And then it was just basically regional meets and then big invitations and then of course state meets that were okay, this is where I'm actually competing with others. But I know Illinois is one of the top just states in general when it comes to distance running. So I mean, you were in a highly competitive environment.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Speaking of, you did win a couple of state championships, right? Or at least one?
One, yeah. 2 mile. Yep.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was actually, it was the very last high school meet that I raced that I ever ran. It was my senior year, 2 mile state meet. And yeah, it was cherry on top.
That's a pretty good way to go out.
Yeah. Yep.
So what
probably should have cut it off from there. Probably shouldn't even run in college, honestly, end it while you're on top. But, no, it was fine.
I think it's good to get the college experience too. That's a different level of commitment. I remember you guys like just training all the time. I mean, that's an insane program they had you guys on. So probably good to get a taste of that, see what that's like.
Yeah, it's true. It was always something that I was aiming at in high school. So it was like you got to at least try it, for sure.
And you can say now you were a D1 college runner.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So what are you doing now for working out?
Now I am. Well, I'm doing a little bit of running, which has been nice. I for the longest time was not doing that because like my knees were like my knees were kind of like brittle, kind of is probably the best way to put it. And for the longest time I was like, I probably shouldn't run because my knees are just basically fucked. But then I was like, I realized like, actually I need to strengthen them because I didn't run after freshman year of college. I didn't run for like years, like most of the rest of college, and then even after it was a couple of years that I didn't really do it. I was like, okay, and then I slowly got back into it, and I was like, okay, it's like my knees are fine. I just need to strengthen them again. And yeah, they are a little brittle. I mean, I've put thousands of miles on them. But yeah, so yeah, I run about 2 days a week. And I've realized like I kind of have to split it up. I can't do like, basically back to back days. It just kind of is too much on the joints. And I also am now, of course, only doing it for like sort of health reasons and sort of longevity reasons. So there's no need to like really push the buttons at all. Go ahead. I was just gonna say that, yeah, I run and then I also just like lift, like 3 days a week, just like basic stuff, gym, pull-ups, push-ups, etc.
Okay, so mostly body weight stuff for your lifting?
And some weights. I do weights. The office that I work at, I'm lucky enough to have like a gym there, and it's kind of like just a beefed up hotel gym, but it has basically everything you need: dumbbells, few machines, etc.
Cool.
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk more about the lifting if you're interested, because I am so into like programming lifting workouts. I've tried so many different things. But first, with the knees, do you do any of the knees over toes guy stuff? Or have you heard of that?
No, what's that?
Okay, so I don't think you're on Instagram. I think Instagram is the guy's main thing. But there's this guy called Knees Over Toes Guy. He was on Joe Rogan. That's where I heard about him. But he was a basketball player. His knees were destroyed. They told him he would never play basketball again. And he didn't want to accept that for an answer. So he just dove into figuring out what he could do to make his knees work well. And his handle, Knees Over Toes Guy, is kind of where he landed, which is you have to do these like strengthening exercises and these things where your knee is over your toe. So like if your feet are on the ground, you want your knee to go past your toe. And that's where you strengthen the muscles that surround your knee. And that can really help with, for him, playing basketball. But what I have used it for is running, because I also had some knee injuries in high school, and my knees kind of were for many years giving me trouble every time I started running again. And then I started doing this stuff, completely changed the game. Like my knees really don't give me any problems anymore. And I should probably knock on wood or something. But, yeah, it's really amazing. And the two things, really there's one main one that I do, and it's reverse step ups. So you can start it on a level surface, but ideally you want to do it on stairs. So you stand on one leg and then you basically just lower down, so your knee is going over your toe, and you touch your opposite heel to the ground.
Okay.
And you can just do a set of like 10 or 15 of those. You can start on level ground to build up, and then once you are pretty comfortable with that, you can do it on a stair so that you get a deeper extension. And I just do that when I do leg day. I do one set. No, I do 2 sets. Sorry. I do 2 sets of like 15 reps of that. And that's the main thing, and it keeps my knees in pretty good shape. But the other thing the knees over toes guy talks about a lot is backwards walking. And he does it on a treadmill with resistance, but those are kind of expensive and not everywhere. But you can just walk backwards, like on the, anywhere. And you just have to really focus on accentuating the knee movement.
Mm-hmm.
You can check out his videos too, and he goes all the way into it. But really made a difference for my knees, and I've shared it with some of my other friends who still run, like Kevin and stuff like that. And it's good stuff. It'll help your knees a lot.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm definitely, I'm like standing here, like doing what you're doing, just kind of as you're talking to it, and I can already tell just how sort of weak those areas are. So yeah, I'm gonna give that a try. That's excellent. Also, I love the guy's handle. That's a great name.
Yeah, it's right on the money. It's exactly what it's about. So,
yeah.
And then, do you have any hip issues too, or is it just your knees, really?
Yeah, it's odd. I actually don't really have hip issues. It's funny. My siblings also ran and competitively, and like my sister, who ran throughout college, she does talk about how her hips. She complains more about her hips than anything. And maybe that's more of a female thing. I don't know, because the hips are wider, but I don't know. No, my hips are fine.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. If you do want to pass on to your sister, there's another one. It's not the knees over toes guy. It's another guy on Instagram. Rish Fitz, I think is his name. Also a great follow. But again, I know you're not on Instagram. But what he does is you just hook a kettlebell with your foot, and then you raise it up, like as if you're doing a knee, like high knees kind of, just with the kettlebell hooked to your foot, like you put your foot through it. And that strengthens your hip flexors. Because what he talks about is a lot of people, for me, I tore both of my hip flexors in high school. So I've had hip issues when I run ever since then, for 12 years or whatever, 15 years. Wow. And once I started doing that, I have had no hip issues. And my friend Kevin, again, he had pretty rough situation with his hips, and he started doing that, and it's made a huge difference for him too. So if your sister has a 15-pound kettlebell or can get one, it can really make a world of difference.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna let her know that. I just remember her complaining about that not too long ago. I was like, oh yeah, that's, I guess, it is unfortunate, because like running it's such a great, it's so great. There's so many great aspects of it for you, and then it's just the only downside is like the joints. It's really it. Yeah.
I always joke that when I was in high school, I really wanted to play football when I was a freshman, and my mom wouldn't let me because she didn't want me to get brain damage, which in retrospect was probably a good thing. But it was ironic that she didn't want me to play football because she didn't want me to get hurt. And then I did running, which I was constantly hurt between like tendinitis, turf toe, Osgood Slaughters, torn hip flexors. Like it was not an injury-free sport. But my
laundry list of injuries. Yeah. I mean, I guess in retrospect, like, I think it's probably better long term that, you're dealing with these than the brain injuries. The brain is a pretty valuable organ, I would say.
Yeah, I would much rather have a working brain than working legs if I had to pick. So ideally, I'd like to have both.
Yeah, true. I guess optimal is like, you probably should have picked like violin or something, like go in bands.
Yeah. So lifting. Walk me through you said you lift like 3 days a week, or that's kind of the plan at least?
Yeah. Try to at least. So, let's see. I've been trying to like improve my sort of system for just developing workouts. Like one of the things that I really struggle with and I've always struggled with is like being consistent with, like conscientious essentially, like being consistent with, practices of any kind, but, especially lifting. But also making sure that it's random enough to where I'm not feeling like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I think I've gotten close. I don't think I'm fully there. I think it could get better. It could be better. As far as what, sort of the system I have for generating workouts. And the other thing is like, I don't really want to think about, it's kind of a problem. I don't really want to think about like, spend too much time like, okay, how do I develop this excellent workout that's going to get me to this, at this point. I don't really have ambition of like, bodybuilding by any means, but I do want to, feel healthy and also like be strong. And so like basically I just have like, and it's kind of, like organizational wise, like I really just use like kind of bare bones, tools to do these things. Like it's basically just literally a note in my phone, that is like, I have a week, 1 week, and then like I break it down by day, of course, Monday through Friday. And I have just basically a type of workout. So let's say just, dumbbell, lifts for chest. And I have the number of reps, the number of, or the weight, and then, the number of sets. And and then at the end I have either a plus symbol, a dot, or a minus symbol. And so basically each week I will copy, sort of the set or the, if I have a lot of energy, when I'm doing this, I'll, sort of actually think about, okay, which exercises I want to sort of recombine and mix and match for that week. But I'll pull, like, usually I'll just copy the whole workout from, let's say, Monday of last week, drop it in maybe Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. And then all I'm making sure I'm doing is making sure that I'm either hitting, I'm aiming for a plus. So some kind of increase. And so that way I know it's just a simple method for, tracking progress. And so all I know is like, as long as there's enough pluses, we try and aim for like all pluses would be excellent. But I know some weeks, it's just kind of like maintaining, and especially depending on the type of workout. But, and so, so I just make sure there's a plus. If there's not a plus, maybe I do the same thing. So I just put a dot. If I reduce, that means, obviously I'm going backwards. So something happened, and I, did less than what I should have done. So yeah, that's sort of the method that I use. And it took a while to sort of get to that, but it was kind of an evolution of like, okay, well, this is what I want, and, just again, like trial and error essentially.
Okay. Yeah, I would say I have a very similar system, and it emerged in a very similar way. I text myself, and then I just copy the text from whatever workout I'm doing. I basically split it into push, leg, and pull, and then I just copy whatever the last one was that I did, and then I change either the weight or the set reps, and just try to either bump up reps or bump up weight each time, at least on, one exercise.
Nice. That's actually good to hear. That's like super validating, because like I also like I don't really follow many like people when it comes to like lifting, and so like it's just kind of like through osmosis of like some friends who work out, that are like one friend recently mentioned to me, like, what he does is he's a pretty big guy. He's pretty healthy. And he talks about how like, yeah, like what you want to do is when you're lifting, like, midway through the set, it's good to like, the first like first two sets you're doing, curls with 25 pound weights. But then the second half of the set, you want to bump that to like either 30 or 35 and maybe reduce the number of reps you're doing. But that way you're always like, basically increasing the weight. Or, maybe not always doing that, but, you want to do that just so you're actually like, building muscle and not just like maintaining the same sort of density of muscle that you currently have.
Right. Yeah, progressive overload is the, I think, like fancy term for that, which is basically every time you work out, you want to get a plus to use the system you use, but to either increase the reps or increase the weight.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that term. That's a good term for that.
It sounds fancy, right?
Yeah.
There's, from what I'm not a bodybuilder or anything either. I ran in high school. I'm not by any means an expert on lifting. I just am really interested in it. But from what I've like read and listened to and learned, there's a big debate constantly raging about weight and reps. Some people, so like the rep range and what weight to use for what rep range. So some people will say that you should vary your rep range all the time and do muscle confusion. Like, so sometimes you should be doing whatever weight you can do for 5 reps. Sometimes you should be going up to 12 reps. And then there's a whole lot in between. So like my brother-in-law, he lifts heavy and he does like in the 5 to 8 rep range, but heavy. Whereas myself and like our buddy Luke, we hit more like the 8 to 12 rep range because although maybe the gains might be slower and you might not be throwing up as much weight, there's less chance of injury when you're handling weight that you can do for 8 to 12 reps compared to, 3 to 5 or 5 to 8. So what kind of rep range are you hitting right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I never really considered that. I'm hitting like generally like between probably 6 and 12, depending on what the exercise is. So yeah, probably higher rep. But that point, your point of like, or that point that you mentioned of like increasing variability is super interesting because, so not to get too far off topic, but like I've recently like gotten into sort of learning about like really ancient cultures and like particularly the Bronze Age. Like I recently read the Iliad and I've gotten into just some of the old like that culture, and it was a very like brutalist culture. Like men were like the ultimate thing you could do as a man back then was of course fight in a war. And like one of the just sort of the underlying mindset, or the thing, an anecdote that sort of underlines the mindset is actually Homer had mentioned like he didn't want to be remembered for writing these 2 excellent like works of art, the Iliad and the Odyssey. He wanted on his headstone that he fought in one of the wars. Like it was yeah. And so anyway, but if you look at these like sculptures, so like they would create these sculptures of individuals, right? Of like man/gods, that they were a fan. That nudity, like just the human form, was sort of highly valued in this culture, and so they would create these sculptures of like just absolutely beautiful, men and women, like people who were just like, you know, in physical form, just like absolutely beautiful, right? And you just looking at these sculptures, like there's one I'll sort of mention, and it's worth looking up because it's a very sort of jarring sculpture. It's called Perseus with the head of Medusa, and it's an image, it's a sculpture of Perseus, who is you know, a god, of course, but he's, you know, in human form. And he's actually the father of, I think the father of Hercules. And, you know, the legend goes that he's the one that killed Medusa, like he chopped off her head. And so it's just a sculpture of him standing there with a sword and Medusa's head. It's very, very jarring, sculpture. But anyway, you look at his physical form, and he's just like incredibly shredded. You know what I mean? Like he's like but he's not bodybuilding, right? He's like, his working out is like functional, right? So you wonder, like, how did he get that form? And you know that, you know, if you just, you know, think about it, like all, you know, men back then, again, like their aim was to fight in wars. And so, you know, during peacetime, what you're doing is, you know, you're not watching Netflix. You're just basically preparing for war. Like that's basically what you're doing. And so, you imagine these people are just like sparring all day long and like, you know, doing all kinds of things, like working out. Like that's basically all that men do. These types of men, at least. And, so anyway, that note that you mentioned of like, you know, versatility, like of working out, you know, that, you know, how do you, you know, is that something better than just doing like, you know, the same rote thing over and over? And I think absolutely, like, if you can get to the point where your exercise is like functional, like you're not only just like, oh, I'm just lifting just to lift, you know, like it feels much better to have like it aimed towards something, right? And of course, I think, you know, long-term health, you know, mental health, et cetera, is a novel or a,
noble,
sort of like a good, sort of aim to have when you're doing that. But, anyway, that was just sort of something I thought of when you mentioned that.
Yeah. It's a really interesting, first of all, the statue you mentioned, I could picture it in my mind, but I looked it up too, and yeah, he's absolutely shredded. And all of those, you know, like the Roman and Greek god statues and the heroes, like they are in immaculate shape, and it's inspiring. I know one thing, when I started lifting, I was like a little bit bashful about the fact that I was going for a certain, you know, that I wanted to work on my physique. Like I felt, for some strange reason, shy or bashful about that. But as I've done it for longer, I've realized, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to look a certain way. If you become obsessed with it, that's a problem. If it becomes an ego thing or like a narcissistic thing, that's a problem. But it's okay to want to work on your physique and want to kind of fine tune it to what you want to look like. That's the beauty of having a human body that you can change. But going to the muscle confusion thing and the functional training thing, when you were talking, I thought of a couple things. The first one was, I learned recently, I was watching the old first X-Men movie, and in the first one, Hugh Jackman, I mean, he's in shape, you know, he doesn't look like a schlub, but compared to the later movies like Logan, he was in nowhere near as good of shape in the first one. And then by the end, when he's like in his mid to late 40s, he's absolutely like yoked and shredded. And so I was looking up like what his training was like for that. And one of the things that his trainer had said was that they were constantly like changing weights, changing like incline bench one day, decline bench the next day, changing the angle of the decline, the angle of the incline, and like constantly doing muscle confusion. And so I think that is something that a lot of people do and find success with. It's not something that it's probably something I could work into my routine a little more, but I am a person who likes to not necessarily do the same thing all the time forever, but I like to kind of settle into a routine. And then, there's the whole kettlebell world, which is basically the idea of kettlebell training is functional training. Like, it's not just doing static curls or, barbell bench press or whatever. It's like doing these complex, a lot of people use kettlebells in these complex movements where you're doing swings or you're doing like a clean and a press where you're using multiple muscle groups and like doing a lot more mobility. And I try to incorporate some of that in my training. And I think it's interesting too, because what a lot of the kettlebell athletes who talk about this kind of functional training mention, and I think it's reflected in those Bronze Age sculptures and stuff like that, is how much core you need when you're doing those kind of functional things versus a more like typical gym approach where you're isolating muscles with like curls or tricep extensions or whatever. But when you're doing those sort of functional things, it engages your core in everything that you do. And the guys who do these kettlebell routines, their cores are just insane. Like
12 packs, like.
Yeah, I mean, just like absolutely shredded, so strong, like tree trunks. Insanity.
Yeah, and not to mention the like lower back too, which is like a part of the core, and like it's always like sort of. I always forget about it. At least I'm always like, oh wait, I do have to actually work on my lower back, and that actually is gonna, help with a lot of things.
Yeah, it's so easy to neglect the lower back. I'm currently nursing my lower back because I am guilty of gym sins, and one of them is I do like to lift heavy from time to time, and so I've been working on my shrugs a lot, and I'm shrugging like with a barbell, doing barbell shrugs. I'm doing like 190, but the problem is I'm not working on my deadlifts, and I don't have a weight rack, so I have to pick the barbell up off the floor. So while I can shrug 190 for 15 reps, pretty reasonably, getting it up into the position that I'm going to shrug from, tweak the back.
Yeah, your lower back's like, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, take it easy there, Tiger.
The making sure, but yeah, it is super interesting, and just like it makes me think of like, you look at what is the difference between a UFC fighter and a bodybuilder? When it comes to like, if you were, let's say walking through a bad part of town, right? Like you live in Chicago, like you're walking through like South Side of Chicago at night. Who knows why you're there? Whatever. Who would you want to have on, next to you? I mean, of course, like, okay, UFC fighter, they fight, that's like obvious, but you look at a bodybuilder and you're like, oh my God, this guy is massive, and like just completely shredded, right? But if you think like, I don't really know this scientifically, but like, I'd imagine the sort of the quality of the muscles is really what matters, in certain situations, right? Of course, aesthetically, like, the bodybuilder looks better and looks stronger, but really, the smaller, Conor McGregor, who is a tiny guy, from what I've heard, this guy is like, he's like basically just like iron steel from the skin to the bone. I mean, like there's, his muscles are like qualitatively better than, the bodybuilder, because, he's doing like much more dynamic workouts. At least I imagine. Again, I don't know too much about how bodybuilding works or even how, UFC training works, but just from, just like from the minimal knowledge that I have of them, like it seems like, the UFC fighter has sort of, different quality of muscle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the bodybuilder type, obviously they're going for size, they're going for hypertrophy, which is like the fancy term for making your muscles grow. And so strength wise, like if the goal was to lift a heavy boulder out of the way, yeah, a bodybuilder would be a great person to help with that. But yeah, I think if you're talking about potentially being in a fight, aside from the technical aspect of knowing how to fight, a UFC fighter has the speed, has the mobility, I think there's a lot of things that, other than just physical strength and power, that are important in real life scenarios, whether it's a fight or just, like, I remember when I started doing more like whole body functional stuff years ago, I noticed it was just so much easier to get in and out of my car, like squatting down and getting into my car and then getting out, especially like holding multiple things and getting out of my car while holding groceries was just so, not that it was hard before, but it was just like, oh, this is like really easy now.
It's amazing how just like those examples are funny, but that is like literally like the benefits of working out. Like your body is going to function like much better in just like basic things. And you don't realize the difference until you actually, are in that position. But I think those points are subtle, but it's like, it is like the, really a core benefit, like a really good benefit.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people write that off too, because I think a lot of people who aren't really involved in fitness, they look at people who are, and they see kind of what we've been talking about, like, yeah, we want a certain physique, we want to be strong, blah, 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 whatever. But I would say for basically 99% of the population, fitness, the best aspect of fitness is the way that it impacts your life. And it just makes not only physical activities easier, but I think it makes your emotional and mental functioning better too. And not just in the way that we already talked about, which is really valid, of just the endorphins and the runner's high after a run or whatever. There's those short-term physiological benefits and the like neurochemical benefits, I guess you would say. But there's also like, you have a fixed amount of energy, right? Your body uses energy, your muscles use energy, your organs use energy, your brain uses energy, and you have a fixed amount of it. You have a certain amount of ATP that your cells can make. And as you get into better shape and you improve your mitochondria's ability to produce energy, and you improve your metabolism and your energy efficiency, and the less energy basic physical daily life tasks take, the more leftover energy you have for the mental and emotional work that you need to do in your day. So like for me, and I think this is probably true for you too, like I work in an office. I don't have to like lift heavy things or run fast. Like the physical aspect of my job is pretty much limited to like, I have to be able to walk down a hallway and go up and down stairs. And like that's most days all I physically have to do at work. But when I'm in good shape, especially when I work out in the morning and then go to work, I have so much more energy for the mental and emotional parts of my job. So when I'm like working on writing a really difficult report or trying to solve a complex problem of like, what's going on with this kid? How can I help this kid? Or like I'm dealing with a challenging situation either with a kid who's dysregulated and I'm trying to help, or doing counseling, or working with an adult who is struggling, I have a lot more bandwidth and energy and patience when I'm physically active and I'm at a good level of fitness, I think number one, because my baseline level of energy is higher and my energy expenditure doing the basic physical things is lower, plus the aspect of the endorphins and the dopamine and blah, 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 all of those neurochemical benefits working out too. And I feel like a lot of people, that was kind of long-winded, but a lot of people I think look past that and they just see like macho guys who want to have big muscles, or, you know, on the female side, like girls who just want to be, you know, tiny or whatever. But it's about so much more than that. And it's sad, I think, when people don't see that it's not just a physical thing, it's a mental and emotional thing as well.
Yeah, no, I think that was excellent. And because the one thing I've actually been curious about lately is like I tend to work out like on my lunch break, like during the day, but I've been considering doing it in the morning, but I've been a little sort of hesitant because I am worried that like you know, I work out and then I'm like basically spent, right? Like, and the day hasn't even begun yet. But you're saying that you actually feel more energized after you work out. Is that right?
That's been my experience. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone's different. And like we said before with nutrition, you got to try it and see what works for you. But my experience has definitely been when I work out in the morning. So I usually get up at like between 4 and 4:15, and then I work out from 4:15, 4:30 to about 5:15, and then I start work just before 8. And I do get tired in the afternoon, but for the morning, I am really solid. I have a lot of energy, and then I would attribute the afternoon tiredness more to, number one, I'm not getting great sleep because I have a baby and I just don't get enough sleep every night. And then I do fasting. I fast until lunchtime usually, so until like 12 or 1 o'clock. And so I think I have a big, because I'm fasting for, 14 or 16 hours, then I have a big spike of blood sugar and insulin after I eat, and then I kind of crash after. So that's something I'm kind of trying to fix right now, or improve my system with. But to answer your question, no, I feel really energized after I work out in the morning. I feel really good.
That's good. Yeah, that actually your mention of being like feeling the crash in the afternoon. I actually recently came across a video of a nutritionist talking, or not a nutritionist. He's some kind of doctor, but he was talking about sort of the natural. He's talking about circadian rhythms and sort of the natural sort of energy levels that you get throughout the day, right? And so he was saying he first started talking about how like as soon as you wake up, it's important to go outside and get natural light. Because there's like, I guess there's some kind of spike in energy as soon as you do that. And then, you're sort of, it's sort of an arch, of course, like in terms of your energy levels throughout the day, peaks around noon. And then there's he does specifically mention a sharp dip, around like between 1 and 3 p.m. Of course, it varies, per individual. But there is like a universal sort of drop in energy around that time. And he says usually, caffeine helps, again, depends on the individual, but like caffeine, naps, something like that will help. Even a 10, 20-minute nap would help to sort of get you back out of it. But that's sort of a natural thing, it sounds like, regardless of, and he's talking about people who get like perfectly, 8, 9 hours of sleep. So anyway, that, it's just sort of an interesting, piece that sort of relates.
Yeah. And the circadian rhythms, there's so much to unpack and talk about there too. Like, it's so interesting how like our body has an internal clock and we have these things that are timed. Like one simple thing I've been doing for years, I think from Andrew Huberman maybe, or Rhonda Patrick or somebody in that space, is not to drink coffee right when you wake up, to wait like 60 to 90 minutes after you wake up before you start having caffeine, because with your circadian rhythm, right before you wake up, your body temperature is at its lowest point, and then you wake up, it starts to raise, and your body floods your system with cortisol because that gets you up and going for the day. And if you combine that spike in cortisol with caffeine at the same time, they kind of like, it blunts the effect of the caffeine, and they kind of not cancel each other out, but they don't work synergistically together. You're kind of like throwing lighter fluid on a fire that's already blazing, I guess you could say. Whereas if you wait 60 or 90 minutes after you wake up, where that cortisol has already peaked and started to go down, then you introduce the caffeine, you can kind of either have another spike or at least kind of level off and keep that consistent level of energy and excitation going for longer. Whereas if you have them lined up, you don't get the same longevity of that focus and energy.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that made sense. I kind of meandered through that.
No, that did make sense. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The circadian rhythms are super interesting, and I know that there is the circadian rhythm aspect of that afternoon tiredness and like that kind of afternoon slump. One thing that I've started to hear about lately that I've heard Rhonda Patrick talk about, I think Huberman talked about it, is this called exercise snacks. So have you heard of this?
No.
So the concept of exercise snacks is you can either do it as an addition to like a fitness program that, for example, you and I are already doing, or some people do it as a standalone thing, but it'll be, you just do for like a couple minutes, maybe 2 to 5 minutes, you can do some exercise throughout the day to get your heart rate up, get into like a zone 2 or maybe even zone 3 heart rate if you're really going for it. And it can really have positive effects for your overall fitness, your longevity, your health, your insulin sensitivity, blood sugar regulation, those kinds of things. And so one thing I've been thinking about experimenting with is introducing exercise snacks either right before, right after lunch, or both. Just hitting like a bunch of push-ups right after I eat lunch to see if that would kind of level out that afternoon slump. I haven't tried it yet, but that's one thing I've been thinking about lately, adding into my program, just to see, because really that is a major goal for me, and I think probably for you and most people. It's like you want to just have stable, consistent energy throughout the day. You don't want to be like tired and lethargic. You want to be at a level where you can be focused and getting stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super interesting. I think like looking back at, the diet that, like we were sort of, at least that I grew up on, which was like a lot of carbs and sugars and stuff. It's like looking back, it's like, like my energy levels throughout the day, even in college, it was like they were all over the place. I mean, it was just like, it was like a hurricane of energy. It was like, okay, feel like shit waking up because, we just, drank all night the night before. And then, of course that doesn't help. And that's obvious. But no, I mean, it's just like the energy levels are all over the place. And only now, realizing just sort of the nutritional benefits of, the benefits of nutrition and of exercise, do you realize like, oh wow, like, no, I can actually feel like really good throughout basically all day long and do things that, it's not only, just the feeling, but also just sort of the mental clarity, the creativity. I feel more creative. Like I'm able to like one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is just sort of the sort of the number of like ideas that are out there in the world, not to get too esoteric, but the number of just sort of ideas that are out there and just how like random it is to encounter like new ideas, you know, like and like you know, often I think it's like if you're constantly under brain fog, there are just the sheer number of like brilliant ideas you could have and brilliant ways of like improving your life are just like inaccessible to you, like just completely inaccessible. And you know, it's like improving the odds or improving your luck. You know, it's like if you can get, you know, these things right, you know, you're basically opening yourself up to accessing more like better ideas, having better ideas, having, you know, better habits and ways of sort of functioning in the world. And, you know, I think only through sort of, you know, getting the baseline, you know, foundations right, are you able to sort of even enter the gate, right, to where you're able to get access to these things. It sounds a bit abstract, but I've been thinking about this lately, and it's you know, because I don't know, like I follow quite a few like interesting people on Twitter, and like some of these ideas, I'm like, where the hell are they getting these ideas? Like, are they just coming up with them? Are they finding them? Like, you know, some of them are brilliant, some of them are just like really out there and weird, you know, and it's like. But in the end, it's interesting, and it in sort of in a way like you know, it's fun to engage with because you know it's like you can go so long just doing the same things over and over and over again, and you get to the point where you feel like you feel like your life is just sort of you know, there's nothing new being introduced. It's just like kind of the same stuff over and over. And of course you do need, routine and like, you know, discipline for, you know, to get anywhere. But, you know, accessing these new sort of new novelty and like novel things, like getting to that point is like, I think requires sort of you know, again, this like baseline functionality in order to even get there. So anyway, that was kind of a tangent, but it is something that I've been thinking about lately, and just with sort of the side work I've been doing, and it's just it just made what you just said just made me think of that.
Yeah. Well, talk more about that. What's the side work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I've been programming for a little while now, for about 2 years. And about 2 years ago, I came across, so I worked at a film festival, for about 4 years in Austin right after college, and, did just sort of like operational things at that business. And, anyway, when I now live in Charleston. When I moved to Charleston, the intent was to, eventually like program full time, specifically working on this one project, which is a new operating system and platform for building applications, building software. And I guess essentially, like it relates to this idea that I was just talking about, of like new ideas, new ways of thought. You know, and the system is basically occupies this kind of space in the software world. So, you know, so software, like basically what it is, it's a project called Urbit. It's an operating system, that is intended to it intends to bring back basically the personal in personal computing. And so like sort of to explain it is it's somewhat difficult, but like going back to like going back through history, like you have in like the late 70s or 70s, early 80s, you have mainframe computers, right? Computers that occupy like a massive room, right? Like massive computers. Or maybe that was a little earlier, but anyway, then slowly you get to personal computing where, Apple and Microsoft come along and they're creating computers that you can literally, bring into your room. And, eventually, we're to the point where we have literally devices everywhere. But one of the things that's happened, through the course of that history is, it's gone back into this sort of this large conglomerate system, right? Where, now we're sort of occupy, like starting in like the, like 2005-ish, like early 2000s, you start to move on, these open protocols start to be sort of, co-opted by these large corporations, right? To the point where now, there's really the internet is only a handful of corporate networks, right? You have, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which is Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. You have these massive, networks that are entirely controlled by these corporations, which is essentially usurped the internet as we knew it. And so, when it comes to, again, like new ideas, new ways of thinking, new ways of life, new cultures, it's very difficult to create those things or to get to a point where you're able to create those things, when you have, a company that, if they go away or like, if they, decide that they don't like you and they don't actually like what you're doing, they can just basically shut you off, like turn off your account, literally a switch of a button. You're gone, which, we saw a lot of this, from 2016 to like 2020-ish, where, there's a whole cancel culture, which it's kind of like seems to have died down quite a bit. But so the question is, how do you get to the point where, if software is a natural substrate of our daily life, which I think it's become that, that's sort of where we're at. Software has eaten the world. How do you get back to the point where people, individuals, families, small communities actually own their software in a meaningful way? How do they actually own it and can shape it how they want, so that they can generate culture for themselves, generate ideas, ways of thinking, ways of life, ways of behaving that are unique. And so Urbit is basically a platform for that. It's a network of networks. It's a peer-to-peer network, where you, as an individual, entirely own, your compute. And, essentially it's, there's many other aspects of it that are somewhat novel. One of which is that, it's intending to, so one of the questions is like, how did we get to this point where, these corporate networks are basically running everything? One of the problems with the internet and the way it was made was that it was so complex and or it evolved in such a way that to where it was so complex to where, like, if anyone tried to, simply get a chat application, for just them and them, you and your friends, you had like unique things that it could do that only you and your friends really cared about. You know, it got to the point where that was so complicated, so difficult to do. Like, if you tried to do that on any normal modern operating system today, like, just give up, because it's going to take you hours and hours and hours to do it. And so, these corporations actually served a need, which is that, like, we need software that, right? Like just everyone needs software that they can easily use. And so one of the things that this project is doing is it's intending to simplify computing from, like, the ground layer up to the top, so that developing software is something that can go back into the hands of an individual, to where an individual can understand, a single individual can understand the entire stack of the operating system, from the base layer to the top. If you tried to have, if someone tried to do that for, let's say, Mac OS or Windows, you couldn't do it. It was literally millions of lines of code, with these sort of modern systems. And so the projects I've been working on is this project. This is kind of the side thing that I've been doing. And I haven't actually been working directly on, like, the core of this, like the core of the software, but I've been working on, like, sort of application specific stuff that, like, sort of will help get people on it and that sort of thing. So kind of a long-winded answer, but that's sort of what I've been doing in my free time lately.
Okay. Well, the beauty of the podcast is that you have the opportunity to give long-winded answers, and I want to hear them. And hopefully the listener does too. I think they do. If they're listening, obviously they do. Cool. And I know we only have a little bit of time left because I have a hard stop in about 10 minutes here. But so I have kind of two questions, I guess, and you can pick whichever one you would rather answer. My first question would be, so, like, what specifically have you been doing that's kind of working on this project, or, like, what's your role in it? Or the second one would be more broadly, as you've been learning coding and programming over the last couple of years, like, how has that changed how you kind of see the world, or, like, what insights have you learned from that? Because for me, I don't do any kind of, like, advanced programming or coding at all, but I do a lot of stuff in Google Sheets with, functions and algorithms in Google Sheets, and then a little bit of the scripting as well, which is, like, basic JavaScript. And I feel like it's changed a lot of how I see the world. Like, one thing is I have kind of a goals spreadsheet, and I started out just having process goals of, like, lifting 4 days a week, for example. And then over time, as I've, like, and I have 40 something goals that I'm working on, but over time, as I've had to do the mechanical, granular aspect of programming the formulas, it's made me kind of think about things conceptually differently. Because I've realized, like, okay, yes, I want to lift 4 days a week, but then I also want to have an outcome goal. Like, what's the outcome that I want to achieve by lifting 4 days a week? So then I have a process goal of lifting 4 days a week, but then also an outcome goal of I want to hit this weight or this many reps for this particular exercise. And then, like homeowner goals, I have, doing the laundry or cleaning the kitchen. And at first I had that a certain number of times per week I wanted to do. But then I realized it actually makes more sense to have that, to use a metric of days since done rather than days per week. Because sometimes I'm on vacation, or sometimes I miss a day or whatever. And then I don't want to have to play catch up and clean the kitchen every day for 5 days in a row. It's just, when was the last time I cleaned the kitchen? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an aside, but like as you learn coding and programming, how has that changed the way that you kind of psychologically operate, I guess?
Yeah, that's excellent. That's great. Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the things that you pointed out there is that and it's been the biggest discovery for me as well, is just how useful software can be if you're able to like manipulate it in ways that like if you're able to basically go beyond just like the buttons essentially, right? Like with an Excel sheet, for example, you have like formulas, right? That you can, if you understand how to make a formula, there's so many different things you can do. Like it's like a new tool that you have, to operate on your own life, right? Or operate in ways that, will improve your life. And so, yeah, I mean, like one of the things that I think sort of, underlines what you just described and has been the biggest, sort of discovery that I've come across with like learning how to program is the sense of agency that you gain from it. Like, it's just again, like software has eaten the world and like everyone interfaces with software in some manner through a lot of their daily life. And if you basically understand the language that it speaks, it's basically like what you described. You have complete autonomy over the system that you're using. It's like the difference between living, like if you're living in a hotel versus owning a house. Like if you own a house, you own that thing, and if you're able to, or maybe it's not only that, it's like you own the house, but also like if you like learn how to, do basic like, handyman stuff, right? Like if you're a handyman, like there's so much more that you can do to your house or other people's houses, that, people who have to hire other people to do, who specialize in whatever it is that you're doing, like A, you have to pay them to do it. Mm-hmm. B, like you're still like you're not as autonomous as you could be. Like you're not as you don't have as much agency over the stuff that you own. Yeah. And so that's been the biggest discovery for me is like, learning how to program. Like you're basically like speaking the language of, the tools that basically everyone uses. It's like, it is, programming isn't for everyone. Like it is not an easy, practice. Like that's for sure. But it is 100% worth it, I think, if you have any interest in it. Because again, like what you just described, I think it is an excellent case, which is that, you can, once you understand the sort of the language, of how your computer works and how your computer, speaks to other computers, you basically, it's like picking up a hammer and nail, and you're able to sort of change things how you see fit. You can customize the systems that you use to improve your life. And that's, I think, like the best thing about, of course, learning how to program, but also just the best thing about computers. I mean, and software are amazing tools. It's just, yeah, it sucks that they've been, it's like they've been taken away from us in some sense. And so, being able to like take that up and get to the point where you're able to actually affect the things that you're using and modify them to fit your life. Like it's so great. It's awesome.
I completely agree with that. And I feel like you nailed it on the head with agency. Like I feel so much more agency and so much more, there's no better word than agency in my life. Just having learned those skills and being able to apply them to how I want to live my life and the systems that I live my life with. I feel like we could keep going for like 3 more hours, and I unfortunately have to wrap it up here. So, before we wrap up, I did just want to say, is there any way that people can follow you if they want to hear more from you or see more of what you're doing?
Yeah, I will say I'm not on a lot of social media platforms, but I am on Urbit, which is a social network as well as a computing platform. Urbit has like these pseudonymous identities, and so I also have a Twitter, which is under this pseudonymous identity. It's spelled POLREL _ WITTER. So you can follow me there. I post occasionally, but it is mostly related to sort of computing and software and building new tools for the 21st century.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll definitely have you on again because we have so much more to talk about. But thanks for being on the Tim Burks podcast. And yeah, really appreciated talking to you.
Likewise, Tim. Thanks a lot for having me, man.
All right. See you, everybody.